Thank you all for being here this evening. We're studying the book of Philippians in here, as Tim mentioned, and we are looking forward to working our way through this book. It's a short book, just 4 chapters, and what's great about that is it gives us an opportunity to pause and look very deeply into every word. We don't have to race through portions of the text just to get through a lengthy book. And somebody might say, well, you never have to do that. I don't know why sometimes we feel like we got to cover the whole book in a quarter. But this is going to be a nice pace, I think, as we study this. And what a great book to study. I suppose all the books of the Bible are great books to study, but Philippians is such an encouraging book. And it teaches us so much about Jesus Christ. And so I'm looking forward to going through this with you. And I'm going to start with just a little brief introduction to the book. I guess the best place to start is to categorize this as one of the prison epistles. It's written by Paul, of course, and it's one of 4 prison epistles: Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. That just means that they were all written while Paul was imprisoned in Rome. Now, you can read about how he came to be in that position in the book of Acts, starting in about chapter 20 and reading all the way to the end. The position you find Paul in at the end of the book of Acts is the occasion of the writing of Philippians and those other prison epistles. And we know that because of several statements that he makes in the letter, which we'll look at. Look at chapter 1, verse 7, where he says, "It is right for me to feel this way about you all, because I hold you in my heart, for you are all partakers with me of grace, both in my imprisonment and in the defense and confirmation of the gospel." So there, very plainly in the opening of the book, he mentions his imprisonment. Now, also in that same chapter, observe verses 13 and 14, where it says, "It has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ." And he says also, "Most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear." Now, I think it's very interesting. He mentions his imprisonment again here, but also in verse 13, you have that phrase, in my translation, imperial guard. And the Greek word there is praetorium, which I think is just transliterated in some translations. And that's one of those words that's evolved through time. Praetorium originally had to do with the Roman soldier camps, and then it came to refer to the governor's headquarters, a Roman governor's headquarters, which is the way that it's used exclusively in the 4 gospel accounts and in the book of Acts. And then it can be used also of the people in the praetorium, which is the Roman soldiers. And that's why it's translated imperial guard here in the English Standard Version from which I'm reading. That's the most likely translation here, is he's saying that his imprisonment has been known throughout the guards, the Romans who are guarding him, to have been for Jesus Christ. He has had an opportunity, Paul has, to evangelize these Roman soldiers. Now, most people say that in the situation Paul was in, he was under house arrest. He was to furnish his own quarters. He had to support himself, furnish his own food and his room and board. But at the same time, he wasn't allowed to leave, and he was chained to 2 Roman soldiers while he was there. I'm hoping that he had really long chains, but I'm not sure exactly what the situation was. It doesn't sound very comfortable, but it's not the worst possible situation he could be in. For example, the conditions that he wrote the second letter to Timothy under were probably in a dungeon. And he's not that low just yet. This is his first Roman imprisonment in, say, the year AD 60. Now, there are a couple other references I want to go to. Chapter 4 of this book, Philippians 4, verse 22, where he says, "All the saints greet you, especially those of Caesar's household." He's in Rome, and he's saying, "Greetings from everyone around me, including Caesar's household, which is very exciting. A lot of people have spilled a lot of ink over that statement, wondering what members of Caesar's household, Caesar being the emperor of Rome, most powerful man in the world, it would be Nero, according to the dates that we're studying and looking at here. So was this maybe one of his kids or a wife or something like that? That's probably a little ambitious. You have to understand that in the Greek world, in the Roman world, household could include soldiers, servants, etc. These may be the same individuals noted in the first chapter, the imperial guard. Could be some servants that are tending to him, or some people he met along the way. But it seems that Paul, since he has been in Rome, has met a lot of Christians and has probably converted a lot of people to Christianity. A couple other references. Chapter 1, verse 25 seems to indicate that he was nearing the end of his imprisonment, because he talks about his expectation that he would be released. He does also in chapter 2, verse 24. So he does contemplate his mortality, but odds are, to his thinking, that he would be released very soon from his imprisonment. So that kind of gives you the occasion under which this is written. He's under house arrest, chained to Roman guards. He's allowed to speak freely. He's obviously doing some preaching and teaching, because there are some conversions even being made among Caesar's household in Rome. Now, he's writing to the church at Philippi. So let's talk about the city of Philippi and the church at Philippi for just a moment. Philippi received the honor of being called a Roman colony, and Luke calls it that in Acts chapter 16, verse 12, because Philippi was the location where Octavian and Mark Antony defeated Brutus and Cassius, and that led to Octavian becoming the first Roman emperor and the Roman Empire. So that was a big moment in Roman history. It happened right there in Philippi in the province of Macedonia during the days of Octavian. Now, Macedonia was just north of Greece. We'd call it modern-day Greece today. But just north of Greece, right above the peninsula, and you'll hear references in 2 Corinthians and other letters of Paul to the churches of Macedonia. You read about that in 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9. Well, Philippi would be one of those. Thessalonica would be another, and there were some others in that area that I'm talking about there, just so you can get an idea of the location. It was named for Philip of Macedon. Philip was Alexander the Great's father, and he founded the city and built it, and it was named in his honor. The background of the church in Philippi is recorded for us by Luke in Acts chapter 16. And we might refer back to that some later on in the class, but very briefly I'll just remind you that Paul and Silas were on their second missionary journey, and they are going back to Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, that peninsula that Paul was raised in and familiar with. So they're going back through there, visiting churches they had established, maybe establishing a few more, but the Spirit somehow was preventing them from going to other places in Asia Minor. And then they had this vision we know now as the Macedonian call, where a man was beckoning them from Europe, from Macedonia, saying, "Come over here and help us," which led to them breaking across into the European continent, finding their way into Philippi, which was their first stop, and meeting a group of ladies worshiping on the banks of a river, converting Lydia of Thyatira there and some others with her, and that was the beginnings of the church at Philippi. They were imprisoned a little bit later, and through that they met the Philippian jailer, as we call him, and he was converted in his household, probably a good group of people there, and those were the first converts in Philippi. The establishment of the church is recorded right there. And so maybe some of those people are the very recipients of this letter to the Philippians, because this letter was written about 10 years after all of those events transpired. You think about 10 years ago, it doesn't seem that long ago to this class. You go in the back there in one of those classes and they think that was an eternity ago, but 10 years ago doesn't seem very long ago to us at all, so it's very likely that maybe Lydia was there, the Philippian jailer for sure, and others with him. Paul had a special relationship with this church, and you'll see that come through as we look through this letter. The character of this letter is the gentlest, most affectionate character of any of the letters that Paul wrote. And so, like I said, that'll really come through. Now, there are several reasons why he wrote this. Four in particular that I want to point out. And maybe the most obvious one or the most business-like one was to say thank you for the gift that they sent. Remember, he's under house arrest. Under Roman law, he had to furnish his own housing. Of course, he can't work and raise money for himself, so he was dependent on the church's contributions to him. And so Philippi was special in that regard, and he mentions this at the end of the letter, verses 14 and following of chapter 4. It was kind of you, he said, to share my trouble. And you Philippians yourselves know that in the beginning of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, no church entered into partnership, that's the word koinonia, sometimes fellowship. No church entered into partnership with me in giving and receiving except you only. Now it seems to me that that phrase, giving and receiving, indicates maybe a church sponsor situation, kind of like we do with many of our mission works and some that we participate in. My brother Barton is under the oversight of the elders of the Chase Park Church of Christ in Huntsville. He doesn't live in Huntsville. He lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. We help to support him, but we do that by sending money to Chase Park. They send money to him. They receive money from other contributors to his work, and it all comes to that group under the oversight of that eldership, and they send the money to Barton for the work up there in Charlotte. So they're receiving money from us and other congregations and then giving money to Barton. Now, he doesn't spell this out for us, but that's what I imagine could be going on here in this church of Philippi. Today we'd call it his sponsoring congregation, but really it's a special relationship he has with them that he has with no other congregation. He goes on to talk about how the gifts they sent were worship. Verse 18, a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. So that's the first reason why he wrote this, is to say thank you, and it's like a missionary report. Your funds have reached me. They're doing their purpose. They're accomplishing what you sent them for. And so you have that. Now, the second reason is to ease their minds over Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus is noteworthy here because he became deathly ill. And that should be easy to remember because his name sounds like a disease, right? Epaphroditus. It sounds like something that's hurting your side, but that's how you can remember Epaphroditus. Got to work hard on Wednesday nights to get a laugh. Epaphroditus is mentioned at the end of chapter 2. He was a member of the church at Philippi, possibly the minister there. But when he came to visit Paul on their behalf, maybe to deliver the gift that they had given, they couldn't put it in the mail or ship it UPS. Somebody had to hand deliver it to him. He got sick in Rome, and they heard about it and knew that he was near death and were very worried about him. And he was worried about them worrying about him. And so Paul needed to send him back with this letter saying he's okay and your prayers were answered. So that's the second reason. Third reason to send it is to encourage them in the face of persecution. If you look at the end of chapter 1, he mentions in verse 28, not to be frightened in anything by your opponents, and goes on to say more about the persecution, the conflict that they had. Paul had trouble when he was in Philippi. Remember, that's where he was jailed. And if it hadn't been for that miraculous earthquake, his life may have ended right there in Philippi. So it was a dangerous place for Christians. And the persecution there was different than it was in Asia Minor because, if I'm recalling correctly, it was a Gentile persecution. It was a pagan persecution. And they were going through that as well. And then finally, which this last reason for writing is kind of strange because you usually think of Philippians as a letter of peace and joy, but it seems that he also wrote this letter to urge them to be united, to urge harmony among the brethren there, to plead for unity. There were a couple of sisters there that he mentions by name. In chapter 4, Euodia and Syntyche, he urged them to agree in the Lord. And this is also the letter in which he writes in chapter 2, verse 14, to do all things without grumbling or questioning. Now, you don't say that to people unless there is some grumbling and questioning going on, right? So he's writing that, addressing a problem that's there, which tells us that even if you're a church worthy of the affections of Paul, you're a church known for your joy and your love, you still have problems. And the problem that afflicts most congregations is a problem of conflict, of striving, of division. So he's urging them not to give in to that and commanding these sisters, among others, to agree in the Lord. So those are the reasons why he wrote it. I'll stop and take a breath here. If anybody wants to make a comment or ask a question, I've been doing a lot of talking here, so I realize somebody may want to say something. Or not. Yeah, I believe so. I think you know that's indicated by the pronouns. Luke never says, and I was there, but he says we. And I think that actually begins right there in chapter 16 of Acts, if I'm not mistaken. So Luke joins them maybe when they get to Macedonia or somewhere around there, and he seems to be with them through that whole ordeal. It's a good question. It would have been Luke, Paul, Silas, Timothy, and others on that trip. Anything else? Here's how I'm going to divide up the book. I'm just going to look at the themes of the letter, and there aren't as many themes as we have Wednesday nights, so some of these will take more than one night to cover. But really quickly, in chapter 1, we have two themes. Tonight we'll talk about the Philippians, the people themselves, which is the first 11 verses. And the rest of the chapter is about the imprisonment. Then in chapter 2, we have two themes, the mindset of Christ and the partners, namely Timothy and Epaphroditus, who worked with Paul very closely and about whom he had much to say. Chapter 3 is about the doctrine that he was teaching versus the doctrine of false teachers that had crept into Philippi, unfortunately. Then two themes in chapter 4, the joy, which is what a lot of people know about, the first part of chapter 4 there, and then the gift that he'd received, last part of chapter 4. So we're just going to look at those themes, and like I said, some of them, particularly chapter 3, will divide up into more than one night. And that's how we're going to cover it. Well, nobody knows for sure, but the guess is, Luke says at the end of chapter 28 of Acts that he'd been there 2 years, and then we don't see what happens. So he was at least 2 years in prison there, and we know that he died under Nero's reign in it had to happen before 65. So he's writing this in 60. He could have been in prison there anywhere from 2 to 4 years, but we don't know for sure. No way of knowing for certain. Had to have time. He probably died in 64. He had to have time to get out, to be arrested, put back in again, and then he was put to death during Nero's reign. Yeah. All right, are we ready to look at the actual letter now? We've got about 15 minutes here. We're going to try to cover as much as we can. The letter starts, as all of Paul's letters, with an address. And he starts by talking about who's writing it. Paul, about whom we're pretty familiar. He was the one who established this church, along with Timothy, Silas, Luke, in the year AD 50, or around that time frame, 10 years prior to the writing of this letter. And he says Timothy is with him. And you have to remember, sometimes if you're like me, I want to put Paul in Philippi. That doesn't make any sense. He's writing to Philippi. They're in Rome. Paul's in prison, which means Timothy is there with Paul in his imprisonment, assisting him, Timothy's life is in danger. I mean, if Paul is a prisoner for preaching the gospel, then Timothy's got a bullseye on his back as well. He's there with him, and this is that young man from Lystra that Paul met and took along with him on his second missionary journey. You probably know a little bit about the biography of Timothy. He had a believing Jewish mother and a Gentile father, and he was an impressive disciple that Paul decided to take under his wing and was with Paul for the rest of his life. Paul will later talk about in chapter 2 how he hoped to send Timothy to Philippi so that he could get some news about what's going on. And he pays him tribute saying, they all seek their interests, but not him. He says, I have no one like him who will be genuinely concerned for your welfare. He's like a son to Paul. So he's very important, as you probably know. Now the letter is addressed to, if you look at verse 1 still, to all the saints in Christ Jesus who are at Philippi. And the word saint there is hagioi, which is related to the Greek word hagios, which means holy. And so it simply means the holy ones. And it refers to all Christians, not just a select few, as in some religious traditions, but all Christians are saints, are holy ones, hagioi. Holy basically means primarily separated from the world, consecrated to God. But in order to be separated to God, you have to be pure and holy and made clean. And so all of that is inherent in that idea as well. So they are the saints. Those are the recipients of this letter. Along with, he says, verse 1, the overseers and deacons. Now, do some of you have the word bishops there, where I have overseers? That's the King James rendering. The word means the same thing. Bishop, overseer means the same thing. It's from the Greek word episkopos. Epi meaning over, skopos, like the scope on a rifle or something that you would look through, means to look. So the word literally means to look over. Overseer is a literal rendering of that word. Now, this isn't an office separate from the eldership. It is one and the same. There are 3 terms at least used to describe the authoritative office in the local church in the New Testament. Here's one, overseer, which emphasizes the ruling authority function of the eldership. Elder is another, which emphasizes the teaching, wisdom, counseling function. And shepherd is the other. Actually, that's more of the counseling, leading function of the eldership. Sometimes pastor, okay? Shepherd, pastor means the same thing. All 3 of those terms are used synonymously in passages like Acts chapter 20, verse 28, 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. And so we know they all applied back then to the same office. Now, later on, through traditions of men, churches started to divide them up, put bishops over groups of churches, and then later over entire municipalities, over provinces. And we had archbishops and hierarchies that just built up into a papacy or something like that. But that's not what you see in the early church under apostolic direction. What you see is Paul and the others establishing churches, putting together a plurality of elders, overseers, pastors, whatever term you want to use for them, and that group of men would lead under Christ that congregation. Now it's interesting that alongside of them, Paul addresses the deacons. From diakonos, a Greek word that appears like 30 times in the New Testament. But only 3 of those 30 times does it refer to a church office, the office of the deacon. That's here and in 1 Timothy chapter 3, where the qualifications for a deacon are listed. The other 27 references or so have to do with just servants or sometimes ministers, but minister means servant, same thing. So the word tells us what the job of a deacon is. He is a special servant working under the oversight of elders on behalf of the congregation. Yet it is a leadership position, which the context here shows us. If it's not, why are they singled out alongside the overseers up in front of the congregation like this? And why are they listed alongside the qualifications of elders in 1 Timothy chapter 3, if they're not leaders. And so you gather that from that. Finally, one last thing about the address here. According to his custom, in verse 2, Paul wishes this church grace and peace, God's unmerited favor and His peace upon them. You'll see that in most of his letters, which concludes the address. Any comments over those two verses? All right, now the rest of this is about the people he's addressing, the Philippians. And it's very prayer-like, verses 3 through 11. So as we go through this, we may not finish it before the bell rings, but as we go through it, we're going to be learning a lot about them, and you can see why this letter is so affectionate when you learn what he has to say about them. It's a prayer of sorts, and in verses 3 and 4 you see a lot of gratitude. He says, I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine for you all, making my prayer with joy. So he's thanking God, and you can see thank there. You can see the word joy in verse 4. You can read them both in terms of gratitude. And he speaks of his gratitude in all remembrance, always in every prayer. Are you seeing the absolute terms here? It doesn't matter what. It doesn't matter what day of the week, what hour, which prayer, when he's mentioning them, no matter what they've done or what the news has come back for them, he is thanking God in prayer for them, always in every prayer. And that kind of absolute terminology is used again at the end of the letter in chapter 4, verses 6 and 7, which I'll refer to because I think it shines some light on what he's doing here, where he says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. So in everything, with thanksgiving, and that means everything, the good and the bad. That's Paul's practice here, is to find some way to thank God in every situation. I think he's teaching us a very important principle here, and it's not to treat bad things like they're good things or to live unreasonably in the world. And it's not that it's bad to grieve over losses or to weep over sad things in your life or to grumble over pain. I don't think that's what he's trying to teach us. What he's teaching us is that we can find a blessing in every hardship. We can find meaning in suffering. We can find a way to lean on God through the worst things in life, and for that we can be thankful. When we're dissatisfied, we do two things. We ask God to make it better. Okay, you can make a petition to God. And this term that he used for prayer actually is the term that has to do with supplications. It's not the just general term for prayer. It's a kind of prayer where you're asking God to change the situation for you. So you can do that, but you can also thank God at the same time. That's something unique to Christianity, I think. That kind of attitude, because it's not unrealistic. It's not saying smile through it all, even if it's terrible. It's not denying your grief or denying your troubles. But at the same time, it's saying God can give meaning to that. Don't ignore the blessings while you're grieving the hardship. And I think this is just a beautiful thing there that we see right here at the beginning of this letter. Yeah.
Does this go with what Paul said that I have learned in all things to be content?
Yeah, very much so. I think it's in the same vein. In whatever situation I am, I've learned to be content. And his gratitude just has a lot to do with that. You know, contentment has a lot to do with being able to open your eyes to the blessings, even through the pain. Yeah, Ray.
I remember when I was pre-hardened, Brother Woodson taught us, he said this is the greatest book. It showed that there was no generation gap between Paul and Timothy.
Mm-hmm.
It showed that they could work together, even though they had an age difference,
Yeah.
great age difference. And he emphasized that because at that time, in the church, there was a problem
Mm-hmm.
I thought
Hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting insight on that.
another thing, he said he was a young man, came to him,
Mm-hmm.
but he called and said, I'm sending him to you to show that he had great confidence.
Yeah. Yeah, he certainly did. And they worked together as partners perfectly. Yeah. And Paul was somebody who built partnerships. And you think about Paul, he could have done it differently. You know, he could have been a commanding presence, an authoritative character. But he made a lot of friends and partnered. And he mentions his partnership here. This may be the last thing we're able to discuss from this prayer. But the thing that he specifies that he's thankful for is the partnership that he had with the Philippians. Look at verses 5 through 7 of chapter 1. Because he's thanking God, because of your partnership, that's the word koinonia, which we've noted already with regard to the gift. So that may be part of what he's talking about here, but not all. Because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. And I'm sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. It is right for me to feel this way about you all, because I hold you in my heart, for you are all partakers with me of grace, both in my imprisonment and in the defense and confirmation of the gospel. Now look at that. There's a lot in there. He mentions this partnership in the gospel, verse 5. And then in verse 7, he mentions partakers with me of grace. You can read those two phrases, partnership in the gospel, partakers with me in grace, as the same. They refer to the same thing. Grace and gospel are used in a parallel way there to refer to the same thing. And look at how he explains that. He parses that out in verse 7 a little further. Partakers with me of grace, both in my imprisonment and in the defense and confirmation of the gospel. So you want to say, well, I wish that I could partner with Paul in the gospel. I wish I could partake in his grace. Okay, well, look at what it involved. Imprisonment and defense and confirmation of the gospel. Which that last part, defense, comes from apologia, which has to do with making a defense before a governor or a court or something. He's probably talking about his trial. You stood with me in my imprisonment. You stood with me in my trials for the sake of the gospel. This is what the gospel cost me, and you're taking up that cost as well. It's costing you as well. And so we all need to understand the gospel is a wonderful blessing. It's something to be thankful for. It's something to partner together in, but it has a cost. And it costs people dearly, even their very lives. And he's thankful for them because they're putting their lives at risk on behalf of him. So we see that. I think that may be a good place for us. Well, it's not a great place for us to stop, but it's the place where you have to stop. I'm going to let a few more comments come through. Go ahead, Jason.
Who is he in verse 6?
Okay, verse 6, that's a passage I hope to talk about more next week, but he's talking about God who began a good work in them at their conversion when they were in Philippi and he visited them and converted them to the gospel. God is the one that brought them to newness of life. Christ in that also, in the mix there. And then he says, he's not done working on you. You know, he's not going to be finished until the second coming of Christ. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean he's going to complete the work in your body that he begins in your soul because he's talking about the resurrection? It's possible. Does he mean, is he speaking strictly on spiritual terms here, that we're growing and we need grace and we need more grace as we continue to make mistakes and continue to receive cleansing from Jesus, like John talks about in 1 John chapter 1, verse 7? Maybe. Whatever's there, we know this, and this is a theme that Paul's going to pick up with more in chapter 3. We are not saved by our own strength or by our own good works or sacrifices. We are saved by the strength, good works, and sacrifices of Jesus Christ. And that's what's at work in us. The redeeming power of the blood of Jesus Christ is at work in us. And there should be peace in that because we don't have to do it on our own. He's doing it in us as we continue to respond to Him in faith. I haven't heard the bell, but it's past 8 o'clock, so I'm going to let you go. Thanks a lot.